on to your butt.
Da-da-da.
Boop.
Welcome to episode 72 of the Silverware Breakfast Club podcast, joined once again by co-host Mary, a woman from Canada who has received so much snow in the last 2 weeks that she now stands 4 centimeters above her head. I am merely a dirty snowball named Darren. Hey Mary, how are you?
4 centimeters. Oh my God.
It's getting pretty tall.
Oh my God.
4 centimeters tall worth of snow, you guys. How are you? What's going on?
I'm good. Your little snowball reference reminded me of the time that one of my roommates in university, she'd never experienced snow before. She made a snowball and took it and froze it in her freezer, and the snowball's name for the entire year was Poor Bastard.
So, okay. So that's a great story. I love stories. That's good
I
stuff.
don't know. It just
That's
reminded me of Poor Bastard. The snowball.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Excellent.
how are you?
I'm doing great until now, but it's been good. It's been fantastic. We had a pretty cool round table. We just finished up here just a little while ago, which is great. We saw a lot of great people, a lot of great friends, a lot of great conversation, as always. I guess I'm the host tonight, so I get to ask the $1 million question. And that question, of course, is, what are you drinking?
Well, I am drinking Ransack the Universe by Collective Arts, which when you tried that when we were in Gettysburg said tasted like Treehouse. So I think I'm drinking a pretty high-end beer right now. And I am drinking it out of my George H. Thomas Rock of Mill Springs, because today is the anniversary of the Battle of Mill Springs. Drinking it out of that mug.
Well played. Okay. I am drinking, Mary. It is called Return of the Yeti. Okay. It is from Log Tavern. Our friend Bill down in Gettysburg bought this for us.
Nice.
And it is really good. And of course, I got it because it's a return, because we're going to do the second Battle of Fort Fisher, and the Union's going to return to finish the job. See what I did? I tied that together right there.
You were just so creative.
I'm having one of those days. I'm drinking it out of my Charles Tilden mug that the great John LaRoe purchased for us and sent to us. He buys stuff, and you can go onto his Redbubble page and buy a bunch of cool stuff. So that's what I got. That's what I'm doing.
16th Maine for the win.
You got it. 16 is great.
That Salient is an amazing place to smoke cigars.
Certainly is. So what's on tap tonight, Mary? What's going on?
So we are going to stay at Fort Fisher where we were last week, and we are going to talk part 2 of Fort Fisher, but we thought we were also going to end it tonight, but next week we're going to be talking a part 3 with Wilmington. So we're doing the second Battle of Fort Fisher. Yep. We're going to take it on to part 3. We're going to talk about the Battle of Wilmington, or the Siege of Wilmington, next week. We're going to finish it up because we had so much fun in Fort Fisher. We decided to kick back, put our feet up, and spend the whole episode talking about this. So let's recap real quick where we were last time we talked. When we last saw Fort Fisher, Mary, the combined forces of Benjamin Butler and Admiral David Porter had just got pantsed in their attempt to capture that garrison that protected that Confederate supply hub of the town of Wilmington, North Carolina, on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, 1864. It wasn't really so much a huge defeat for the Federals as it was a situation where Butler felt, which was supported by his subordinate, a guy who was opposed to run the campaign, a guy named Godfrey Weitzel, but the fort was too strong for them to take, and so they took their ball and went home. So real quick, Mary, in case you forgot, which was 50-50, Wilmington was the only Confederate seaport left for the Rebs after Mobile fell in August of 1864, right? And it was the lifeline, the lifeblood supply line for Robert E. Lee at this time. Now, Lee knew holding Wilmington in its haven for supplies that were carried by those blockade runners was everything for Fort Fisher, and what that was protecting it. And if the loss of Fort Fisher would mean the loss of Wilmington, which would mean the loss of their supplies, which would mean the loss of Robert E. Lee's army, and probably the loss of the Confederacy. Exactly. And that's exactly what he told Lamb, he's at the garrison in Fort Fisher, and Lee tells him, yeah, if you lose Fort Fisher and Wilmington, then that's it for Richmond. So you can't imagine, we're going to see this later in episode, the pressure that Lamb is feeling and what he has to do, because he knows what Robert E. Lee has said to him about, like, yeah, if you fucking lose this place, dude, like, we're going to lose Richmond. And at this time as well, and this isn't surprising, is Lee is starting to run low on munitions and essential supplies. And that is because of what is happening in the Western Theater with Sherman and his march to the sea. And now he's going through the Carolinas. It's into December, into January. He's starting to go through the Carolinas. He's ripped up all that railway through Georgia, and the munitions cannot get through to Lee like they were because the infrastructure has basically been destroyed. Lee's realizing he's slowly And it's starting to actually go rather quickly, being bled to death right now, his army.
It is. In between the first and second battles, there are going to be some changes. After that first battle, the one that ran from December 24th to 25th, 1864, absolutely was a surprise that Benjamin Butler's completely foolproof plan of blowing up 215 tons of black powder in the U.S. Louisiana did not work. You'll notice my sarcasm.
No, I did. It's shocking. I was thinking it's kind of like the crater where that was a complete shit show too.
But Butler got himself dumped from command, much to the delight of U.S. Grant, who hated him more than I hate the Buffalo Bills. That's how much he could not stand him.
I do not like the Buffalo Bills right now either.
Okay, we're just going to let that go right there.
Yeah, we'll let that. We won't discuss that.
But the thing is that everyone, the Union and the Confederates, knew that the Federals absolutely had to try this again, and they had to try it again soon. Now, the fort, especially Wilmington, had to be in the North's pocket and to cut that vital supply line that we just talked about. It was the only thing keeping the Confederate hopes alive on the field. Now, with Benjamin Butler sent home to Lomas, U.S. Grant is going to need a commander of that force, and he turned to a guy named Major General Alfred Terry. Now, Terry is a New Englander, so he's smart, probably also hated the Bills. But he's from Hartford, Connecticut, and he was born November 10th, 1827. He wasn't military trained. He was a lawyer. He graduated from Yale Law School in 1848. When the war started, he kind of like Rufus Dawes did with Wisconsin. He joined, but he raised his own regiment. He's going to raise the 2nd Connecticut, which is going to participate in the First Battle of Manassas on July 21st, 1861. He's then eventually going to take over that 7th Connecticut. He's going to get his star. He's going to get his general star in April 1862, and he'll take over command of that Morris Island division of the 10th Corps. And he was instrumental in that siege of Charleston and Morris Island in South Carolina in 1863. Yep. He was involved in the fight in Grimball's Landing, which of course is made famous by Robert Gould Shaw's 54th Mass, as well as the assault on Battery Wagner. So he'll end up taking over that 10th Corps in the Army of the James after its commander, David Bell Birney, got stomach issues, tried to blame the cart, but died anyway in October 1864. Despite Terry's success, the thing about him was despite his success, he seemed to always fly under the radar. No matter, he had some success, but no one in Washington seemed to notice. Now, one person who did notice Terry's success was a guy named Ulysses S. Grant. Yep. So when Grant needed a guy and he wanted to take another run at Fort Fisher, Terry was going to be his guy.
Yeah, and that's also because Terry was going to get along with Porter as well. He knew that, Terry and Porter were going to work together because Terry understands the importance of working with the Navy. And so he and Porter get together to make this plan. And the other thing that Grant does for him too is he increases the size of troops that he's going to have there, because Grant is like, okay, well, maybe if we have more, they're going to be a little bit more threatened. And Porter's going to be there leading the Navy again, because it's Porter. Why not, right? And he's going to have approximately 60 vessels, a force of 2,000 sailors and Marines. So the important thing to note about Fort Fisher, the second battle, is the Marines are there too. And the Marines are another one, like the Navy. They don't get talked about a lot in the Civil War.
No, this is going to be one of those few times with the Marines when we talk about this. This is not going to be one of their better days, but we'll talk in detail about that. But, Terry and Porter, they're a natural fit. They really, really are.
They are.
And it's going to be that because you remember how much Butler and Porter did not get along. These guys do get along, but Terry has that experience with the siege of Charleston. He's going to join up with Porter to try to finish that job that Butler and Porter could not do. So the pressure at this point was absolutely on the Union. Despite the November election already being over now, taking over Wilmington and removing that monstrous Fort Fisher and eliminating that blockade line was a gigantic issue. Gustavus Foxmary, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, said this country will not forgive us for another failure at Wilmington. And he was right about that. They had to have it. So on the Confederate side, they knew that the Union needed to take Fort Fisher and Wilmington. They just knew. Yep. Commanding the garrison was Major General William H.C. Whiting from last time, as well as the aforementioned by you, Colonel William Lamb. Mm-hmm. Now, Robert E. Lee, at this point, he's in the midst of throwing and taking haymakers from U.S. grants at Petersburg at this point is part of that Grant's Overland campaign, right? Despite needing men, because he needed men to fight Grant, he's going to send a division under Robert F. Hoke to Wilmington to help add to the rebel numbers. Lee knew that Wilmington's supply line was everything for him, and he was going to risk that many guys to send down there, even though it meant weakening his army against Grant, who was dealing with him in that Petersburg area.
Yeah, and so he's going to send Hoke down there. The other person who's also down there too is Bragg.
Yeah, we'll talk about Bragg because Bragg, he's an interesting cat. The thing about Hoke though is he's going to have 6,500 guys, right? He's going to get there towards the end of the first battle around Christmas time. It's too late to really do anything,
and then he's just kind of hanging out.
He's still going to be there now. Whiting, he's prepping for this inevitable second attack on the fort, and he wanted more men, right? So he's going to send a message to your boy Braxton Bragg, and he says, I hope that on any renewal of an attempt to land, the enemy will not be allowed to do so without opposition. General Braxton Bragg, we'll talk about him. He is going to be sent to Wilmington, and he is a huge supporter of his BFF Jefferson Davis in Richmond.
Big
right?
time.
October 1864, he's going to go there to take command of this Confederate force in the area. Now, he had a really bad reputation already, especially in the Southern press. When it was announced that Bragg was going to Wilmington, the Richmond Enquirer wrote, Braxton Bragg has been ordered to Wilmington. Goodbye, Wilmington. That's what they wrote.
God, what could they see into the fucking future?
So they just knew.
I mean, his reputation at that point has been, Bragg has his good days, but then he just kind of goes on this kind of sharp decline, I guess you could say. And he, Whiting is sending him messages saying, could you help? And as we're going to see, either he's in denial about what the threat is, or he just doesn't give a fuck. Well, it's one of the two. And I'm not sure which it is.
I have my own opinion, and we'll go with this towards the end. His decision to do what he did is going to be very, very flawed, and we'll talk about that. So early on January 6, 1865, the Union Army transports are carrying 10,000 men of the Federal Army of the James under Terry, and they're going to go covertly. They're going to depart from Hampton Roads. Now, Admiral David Porter's fleet this time has 58 ships instead of the 64 last time. They're going to depart around the same time from Beaufort, North Carolina, and they're going to be heading towards Cape Fear and Fort Fisher. Now, the Union game plan this time is a little bit different. The Battle of Fort Fisher, say that 3 times quick, okay? Their game plan was take out Fort Fisher to stop the Confederate blockades. Yeah. That was the whole point. This time is different, okay? They want to take out Fort Fisher, and then once they take it out, they're going to take out Wilmington. Yeah. So it's a little bit different because
it's a 2-pronged approach, right?
Right. They know they need to cut Lee's supply line as well as, to what you mentioned before, help Sherman's Carolina campaign, which is already underway. So you kill with 2 birds in 1 stone here, literally and figuratively, right? By the evening there of the 6th, the fleet is starting to be seen from the Fort Fisher parapets. Colonel Lamb, he's standing on that parapet, and he says, I saw from the ramparts of the fort the lights of the great armada, as one of another appeared on the horizon. So the boats are coming. They knew they were coming. The funny part about it, this is going to be right around the 12th. What's Bragg doing at this time? He's in Wilmington.
He's whittling.
He's worse than he finishes whittling. He's having a review and parade of his troops.
He's
the
hell?
Marching around.
Right? He's just so I don't know. He seems so just not really. I don't want to know what's going on, but I'm just going to ignore it.
I think, who knows? But Jefferson Davis, he knew the importance of Wilmington. He's going to message Bragg in regards to this effort to hold on to Fort Fisher in the town. And Jefferson Davis says to Bragg, we are trustfully looking to your operations. May divine favor crown your efforts.
Whoa.
So they're basically, he's sitting there with his fingers crossed going, please,
Wow.
Now,
meanwhile, Lamb is sitting there on the 12th and saying, sunrise the next morning revealed to us the most formidable armada the world had ever known, supplemented by transports carrying 8,500 troops.
They saw them all coming. I mean, you can see them coming a mile away, right? So early that next day, around 1 o'clock in the morning on the 13th, Bragg is actually going to order the main body of Hoke's division to go via land from Wilmington to a place called Sugarloaf. We talked about it last time. It's a few miles up the peninsula from Fort Fisher. It is between Wilmington and Fort Fisher. Now, Hoke is going to send one of his North Carolina brigades under William Kirkland. He's going to send them kind of up through the down a steamer down to the Cape Fear River. He's trying to get people down there, okay? Now, the Union attack will begin with a massive bombardment from Porter's gunboat, just like last time, that will happen simultaneously with a Union infantry attack on the fort's land face by 3 divisions of the 24th Corps, around 10,000 guys. including brigades from the U.S. colored troops, okay? The attack will be assisted by a second land attack on the Fort sea face by 2,300 plus men from these naval marines you just talked about under David Porter. Mm-hmm. The whole thing's going to begin on Friday the 13th of January 1865. So that's bad juju right there for the Confederacy, right? The sun is going to rise early in about 7:20 in the morning on the 13th of January. A group of Union gunboats are going to begin shelling that peninsula about 4 miles north of Fort Fisher. Now, this is going to be that federal landing zone. Okay, think D-Day. They're going to pound the beach, get rid of all the artillery, and so they can land their guys. Soon later, another naval bombardment is going to pound Fort Fisher's land front. And what this is going to do is destroy rebel telegraph lines and cover that whole area with smoke so they can't see what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And unlike before with the first Fort Fisher, when Porter was like, oh, yeah, my shots have hit every mark. And Lamb was like, yeah, that was a waste of gunpowder. This time the shots are going to hit their mark. It was described that the earth was trembling from this bombardment. They were hitting their mark. They were so accurate in how they were doing it. And I think that goes back to the comment that you said in our first episode about it, that the first episode was really like, it became a recon. So I think Porter was able to see from that first time, okay, this is how the fort is. That second time he goes in, which is right now, he's able to aim the guns a lot better, tell the men where to aim. Lamb's probably not doing his whole thing like, oh, I'm going to move the fucking flag around on you now. Mm-hmm. Porter's able to aim because he knows what he's aiming at. They know their target now. They didn't know that in the first battle, right?
Well, the first battle, they were aiming at the flags because they couldn't see it because the sand fort is slow.
Exactly.
This time they weren't aiming at the flags. They were aiming at the guns, north on the land face and on the beach in front of the sea face. That they were smart this time. They weren't firing on the fort. They were firing just north of it and just northeast of it. Now, by 8 o'clock in the morning, these Union troops are going to begin embarking from those transports for this amphibious landing on a place called Federal Point. And thousands of federal troops under division commanders Adelbert Ames and Charles Payne are going to come ashore at Federal Point. Now, north of the landing point at Sugarloaf, the Confederates, they're there under Robert Hoke. They're going to solidify their defensive position, right? He's going to sit back and let them land because what he's afraid of is weakening his line and allowing Union troops to march north right past him to get into Wilmington. Here's the thing with Bragg, and here's what I think, okay? Bragg had a gigantic tactical error in his head. But his goal in his mind was protecting Wilmington. So he did not want to commit enough troops to Fort Fisher, thinking that was going to weaken his chance to defend. But what he didn't realize, if Fort Fisher fell, Wilmington didn't matter anymore.
Exactly.
Because what is the sense of defending Wilmington if you lose Fort Fisher? And that's the great flaw with this with Braxton Bragg. He is so convinced that he can't commit troops to protect Fort Fisher because if he does, he won't have enough to fight at Wilmington. When at the end of the day, you lose Fort Fisher, you lose the blockade runners, Wilmington's gone anyway. And this is the part of the problem with Hoke, too, is he doesn't want to commit troops to fight Fort Fisher for that same reason, because he thinks that these Union troops are going to go right through them and they're going to head into Wilmington. But, the first thing that Alfred Terry does when he gets there, he's going to send a division of the Union knew this too. Mm-hmm. They're going to send a division under the USCT under Charles Payne up that peninsula to get between Hoke's Rebs and Sugarloaf, right? And the Union men on the peninsula. What they kind of want to do is they kind of want to keep them there and pin them there. Now, Payne, he's a commander of the 3rd Division of the 24th Corps. He's a Boston guy, Mayor. I don't know if you know this. He's a Boston guy, Charles Payne. And here's another thing that's cool about it. You know what he did after the war?
What's that?
He owned 3 yachts. All 3 of them won the America's Cup. Kind of cool. Nice. Boston guy. We win here usually.
Well,
not this
know.
Weekend, but
you're always a winner in my books. Don't worry.
Okay, whatever. Anyway, but the other part of this Union hammer, right, will be swung by a force of 2,361 naval Marines from Porter's boats under the command of a guy named Lieutenant. He's a guy from Philly named Lieutenant Kidder Breese.
Amazing name. I was just looking at his name. Amazing name.
Definitely a cool name. Definitely one of the members of the all-civil war name team.
Yeah.
But the plan is Ames is going to land is going to send these guys to the land face of Fort Fisher, which is kind of like the northeast. Yeah. Think of Fort Fisher looks like a 7 from the sky. That's kind of what it looks like.
Oh, so it's not a popsicle like it usually?
No, not a popsicle. No, this one's a 7, okay? Now, right at the bend where the 7 connects, that corner on the top right is where Brees's guys are targeting.
Yeah, at the northeast bastion, right?
The northeast bastion. You got it, okay? So while this is all going on, these 58 gunboats are going to rain shells down in this fort, okay? By the way, speaking of Brees, Mary, you know where he's buried? He's buried in Newport, Rhode Island, right near Gouverneur K. Warren. Same area. Don't know why.
Wow.
That's where he's buried. So
gotta go there someday.
He chose to spend his eternity in New England. There you go, right?
Nice.
Inside the fort, William Lamb, he is going to be joined by General Whiting to get some reinforcements. He'll have about 1,500 men at his disposal to defend the fort for the Confederates. Now, Whiting, he's knowing these federal troops are on the peninsula now, right? Will message yet again. Yep. He'll message Braxton Bragg and is incredulous at why they are not being attacked.
Oh,
his message says, the enemy is on the beach. Where have you been all day? Why are they not being attacked? That's literally what the message to Braxton Bragg was.
And it's not great in the fort either, because Lamb says that after the bombardments, it's made it possible to repair the damage on the land face at night. No meals could be prepared for the exhausted garrison, and not more than 3 or 4 of my land guns were serviceable. So in the fort, it's not great at all.
Well, think of a chessboard. Okay, Terry and Porter are setting up the pieces at this point, and they're getting ready to attack. They're putting everything in motion. So by early Saturday morning on the 14th of January, Terry's troops are digging entrenchments at a place called Battery Anderson and right on the Cape Fear River. Now, by 8 o'clock in the morning, that line spans the entire peninsula, okay? At this point, Hoke realizes the Union line is way too strong to attack it. And as the morning goes on, Whiting is getting more and more frustrated at Bragg, who seemingly is just sitting around letting the whole situation happen and not doing anything about it. So you can imagine the frustration of these guys. So around lunchtime, right around noon, he's going to message Bragg yet again. He's going to say, the game of the enemy is very plain to me. I have received dispatches from you stating that the enemy has extended to the riverbank, which they never have been allowed to do. If they remain there, the reduction of Fort Fisher is but a question of time. I will hold this place to the last extremities, but unless you drive that land force from its position, I cannot answer for the security of the harbor. So Whiting now is like, what the hell? They're realizing for the most part, he's going to have this quote to Lamb. He's going to basically say, dude, we're sacrificed.
Yeah, he says we're sacrificing ourselves.
And so that's going to be a really crappy feeling, right? To know that they're being left and you don't know why. Bragg's actually going to reply to him, and he's going to say, I'm just going to send some reinforcements from Hoke, which he does, that will render the fort impregnable against assault. And I will talk about that.
Well, that's what Bragg believed. He thought like Fort Fisher was impregnable against anything.
Well, he's going to send troops under a guy named Johnson Haygood, okay, his brigade. Mostly guys from the 11th and 21st South Carolina. And it's going to total around 1,000 men. But here's the problem. Out of 1,000 men, you know how many make it to the fort? 350.
Exactly.
That's all they make it.
Yeah.
So that's 35%. Not good, So late in the day of the 14th, Terry and the chief Union engineer guy named Cyrus Comstock is going to arrive in Battery Holland, okay? And will reconnoiter that fort along with Newton, Martin, Curtis. Now we talked about it last time. They all agree at this point the fort is ripe for the picking. They know they got it. They know that the gunboat attacks have taken out just about all the rebel defenses north of the fort. So on the morning of January 15th, the Union has destroyed just about every rebel gun on that land face of Fort Fisher. 4. Right. And there was an 8-inch Columbiad and all 4,000 men now of Ames are in position. So they are locked and loaded. Meanwhile, Cushing's brigade is at nearby Battery Holland, and that 2nd brigade under a guy named Galusha Pennypacker. Fantastic.
It's an amazing name. It's not the AM Sterling Wood, but it's still good.
I don't know. That might be a future Starbucks cup name right there, Galusha. You can't go wrong with
Galusha. Would be amazing. So would what's his name? Kidder?
Oh yeah, Kidder Brees is a good one. But Galusha Pennypacker used to be there with his 3rd Brigade under Lewis Bell has landed there as well. So he's getting all these guys. Meanwhile, this continuous barrage from the gunboats is still raining down again and falling among these newly arriving reinforcements of Battery Buchanan under Haygood. And that's a big reason why they only got 350. The gunboats had a big part of it, right? Now, on the sea face of the fort, those 2,261 Marines are going to be under Porter have arrived on shore Federal Point. Now, the main force of Curtis's brigade is 300 yards north of the fort, and Pennypacker and Bell are behind Curtis, right?
Yep.
And all the dominoes are lined up, and Terry's ready to pull the trigger on the second assault of Fort Fisher.
Yep, he is. And he's going to send Curtis in first to do that.
Well, first he will, but he's what he's going to do first and foremost. He's going to signal them, and a lot of the Confederate diaries talk about the signal. So right around 3:30 p.m., the shells from the gunboats on the land face are just going to stop. Okay, and several gunboats. All of a sudden, a lot of these gunboats sound this ear-piercing blast of these steam whistles. Okay, that is so loud it can be heard as far away as a Kincard and DQ. That's how far away these things can be heard.
Kincard and DQ.
And what this thing is, this is the starting gun of the attack, and everybody knew it. So, okay.
No, and that's when Ames is going to send Curtis in, and he goes in there and he takes very heavy fire, very heavy casualties, and he gets overrun at the outer works as he storms the first traverse, and it's brutal hand-to-hand combat there. And Ames is watching this happen with Pennypacker.
He does, and you got to feel bad for Curtis. I mean, Curtis, he told people he was 6'7". Do you know that?
Yes, I was reading that about him.
Most people think he was 6'5". And don't you
so he said he was 2 inches light, less than when he was.
Who the hell embellishes their height? It's crazy, but that's what it was, But they say Winfield Scott was the tallest man in the army. It was 6'5", but Curtis said he was 6'7". But anyway, I digress.
Anyways, so he takes very heavy fire, and that's when Pennypacker has to go in, and Ames is going to go forward with him, and the Confederate snipers start to target these men, and his men fight through the Riverside Gate, and Ames orders them into the fort despite all this heavy fire that they're under. So this is absolutely brutal fighting that these guys are under in the Union. Curtis is experiencing hand-to-hand combat. When Pennypacker and Ames go in, they're being targeted by these snipers here.
Right, but before they get to that point, though, the initial phase of the attack was those Marines, right? Yeah. So Porter's Marines under Captain Breeze, those 2,200 plus guys, they're going to begin to march on the northeast face of the fort. And the reason why I mention this is because all the attention of the fort was focused on them, right? The action. That action on this northeast point, it brought all the boys to the yard, is what it did. Okay, including the Confederate leadership, Whiting and Lamb, right? So, and they're going to personally lead the defenses. So, what's going on is they're fighting now. The Marines are going to quickly start to have problems. The first reason why is these 2,300 guys aren't in the same division. They're all volunteers from all of the 58 boats. They've never fought together, especially on land. That's part of the problem. The second problem was they all fought with pistols and swords. That's what they had to fight with, which is brutal. Thanks. And the third thing was they were supposed to attack in 3 waves. And what they did is they all went berserk and did one big mass confusion run. So
it was very just disorganized.
So when they approached the fort, the Rebs who were waiting for them, they're on top of the parapets. They just start pouring fire down on these poor guys and devastated these Marines. Now, Whiting himself stood on the ramparts swearing at the top of his lungs, screaming at his men to kill them all. He must have been an angry fellow, that Whiting. But he was fired up. But the Marines got completely routed, and they got forced, and they fell back. And it made the rebels scream at the top of their lungs in joy. It reminded me of you when you saw the Howard statue that day in Gettysburg.
Yes, happy. I was so happy.
But here's the thing, and it was right at this moment when those rebel cheers stopped and the pucker effect took over, right? Because Lamb and Whiting, they're going to look to their west, and what are they going to see? They're going to see those Union flags of Ames over that western salient of the fort. Now, the main attack on Fort Fisher would not be from these Marines on the northeast bastion there. It's going to be on that western face. And that's what the rebels were not ready for.
Exactly. And that's the attack that I was mentioning earlier, where it's Curtis that goes in first and he takes the heavy casualties when he overruns the outer works and storms the first traverse. And then Ames says to Pennypacker, okay, we're fucking doing this now. And they go in and they take sniper fire, and it's hand-to-hand combat in there. And that's when Ames orders Lewis Bell in, and he's ordered forward because the other Union troops are stopped at the first traverse. And Bell ends up getting killed.
They get there. Little time has gone by before we get to that point, though. And basically, it's okay. But I mean, Curtis is going to initially send in his 100 guys because he needs to take out the abatis and the parapets. They have to get in there to make the point. So once they get through this, like you were saying, they start pouring through Fort Fisher, getting into that western end. Now, they're going to take those heavy casualties, and they talk a lot about the hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah,
right?
It's brutal.
Now, they were literally at arm's length fighting with everything from fists to broken Labatt's bottles, axes.
That's the worst. Geez, that's like a battle in Huron County. Broken Labatt's bottles? What are you talking about? That's me in high school.
It was like a crazy hockey fight gone wild.
Yeah.
And it just went and went. That second wave is going to be from Pennypacker, who's going to continue to drive his way into the fort. They're going to be out of that 203rd Pennsylvania. And they're going to clear that passage. And then minutes later, federal troops are in the fort and they're in the parade ground. So they're just streaming through. Now, these Union troops are going to pour in from the north and through that Riverside Gate. And they're going to, that was opened after the feds took out a 12-pound Napoleon that was right there. But the thing is, to try to stop the onslaught, the Rebs are going to kind of start firing from a battery south of the fort, a place called Battery Buchanan. Okay. Now, they're going to start firing willy-nilly into the fort, and it's going to take out some of their own guys. But they're desperate at this point, right?
Oh, absolutely.
The Union troops are taking a beating as well because, and also many of their officers are being taken out. The 2nd Brigade Commander Galusha Pennypacker is going to be hurt here.
Yep.
He's going to plant the flag of the 97th Pennsylvania on that 3rd traverse, and he's going to be immediately hit. He'll survive. By now, it's around 4 o'clock, okay? And many of these Rebs have fallen back into the fort, and Ames is there. And he's like surveying the situation, seeing what the deal is. And he notices his troops are running out of gas. They've been going full speed. Don't forget, they've been fighting hand-to-hand for hours now. And he's going to finally send, at this point, in that 3rd Brigade under Lewis Bell, guys from New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Indiana, and New York. Yeah,
and that's because the troops are stopped at the 4th Traverse. And Bell ends up being killed pretty early on by a sharpshooter. But the other thing that happens here is like things are getting so desperate for the Confederates that Whitting is going to lead a counterattack, and he charges the Union soldiers who are like, okay, you need to stop and surrender. And he's like, I'm not surrendering. And they end up shooting him, and he gets wounded. And not only that, so at this point, the fighting gets so desperate, and Lamb is, all he's got in his head is the fact that, Robert E. Lee has told him if, Fort Fisher falls, if Wilmington falls, then Richmond is done. And I don't know what I'm going to do after this. We can't go on. He rallies the men that are sick and wounded and to try and fight and to hold the Union.
He does, and meanwhile, Whiting, he's injured. He has that counterattack. He gets hurt, but he gets hurt kind of bad, but not as bad as you think he does. He's going to message Bragg again around this point, right before the whole thing happens with Lamb. He's going to message Bragg. He's going to say, "We still hold the fort, but are sorely pressed. Can you assist us from the outside?" Both Whiting and Lamb are hoping and praying at this point that Bragg is going to send somebody. And this is when the battle again kind of stalls for the Union side, because they're running out of gas again. And what happens is, almost out of a movie, when they slow down, what happens, the Union gunboats start again.
Yeah, they do.
They start firing the shells from the sea, and it starts pinning the shells into the fort. The Rebs are going to fall back. Now, Lamb, this is what he mentioned before. At this point, he's desperate. Any port in the storm, he's going to run into that Confederate hospital in that bomb-proof underground, and he's going to start pulling out injured and sick soldiers.
Can you imagine doing that?
I mean, these poor guys are hurt. They're lying in bed. It's a day off. Who the hell knows? But they're in there, and they're going to go. And really, this is probably around 4:30 in the afternoon or so.
And he's been advised to surrender at this point. He's been told you need to surrender the fort. But he's got in his head like what Lee said to him about if you lose this, we're going to lose Richmond.
Yeah, it's true. And he's going to, like you said a minute ago, he's going to get hurt. As soon as he starts to arrange that counterattack, he's going to get hurt. The funny thing is, he actually gets taken to that field hospital in the bomb-proof. And who is in there is Whiting. Yeah. Because he's been hurt too. And they're laying right next to each other. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall here, that conversation. Like, what the friggin' hell?
What is happening? Lamb is probably like, so have you heard back from Braxton yet? What's going on with that shit?
They're like this because they're thinking this is going to be the worst. This is the worst day ever. Whiting and Lamb are both down. So the command of the fort is going to fall to a guy named Major James Riley, who has been commanding that 10th North Carolina. Yeah. Now, Riley's going to try to rally the men. And he's going to gather around 200 guys at the back door of the savannah of the fort. It's called the Sally Port. Okay, he's going to try to get them through there. He will lead a counterattack, but it will fall flat. He'll lose 2/3 of his men right there. That gate will be known as the Bloody Gate. That's how that thing goes. Real creative name, but appropriate, I suppose. But the Union victory at this point for Newton Curtis has got to be so small, so close he can smell it as darkness is falling. And though Ames wants to entrench for the night, and we got this, we'll finish off tomorrow. Curtis is like, screw that, let's freaking go. So it's about 5:30, and he's going to get fired up to go, and he's going to be seriously wounded himself now, Curtis is. He's going to get hit, and because he's going to try to get reinforcements. So his bravado kind of cost him. And I guess, as this goes on, Terry's going to notice around this point that the Union advance is starting to slow again. Just think of it like a wave. It goes, it tips.
Well, it's like we've talked about many times before. Like you have adrenaline for so long in these battles, and then all of a sudden it's like exhaustion hits you. And we saw it at Antietam where around noontime, the soldiers on both sides just get exhausted and they rest, right? And that's probably where these guys are getting now. They're exhausted. Their adrenaline has run out.
But Terry's going to notice this, and so he's going to blow the conch shell again. And this time he's going to have General Charles Payne to send his 27th USCT troops under Alan Blackman in. Okay, he wants to do this. Now, Whiting is going to message Bragg. He must have free data. He's been messaging this guy so much at this point.
Better cell phone reception than I do here.
Bragg is at Sugarloaf at this point, and he messages Bragg and says, the enemy are assaulting us by land and sea. Their infantry outnumber us. Can you not help us? Right? Now, Bragg, for whatever reason, is hearing these rumors that Fort Fisher is going to fall. He gets this message, but he kind of blows it off again. Mm-hmm. He will eventually, at this point, send a message to Wilmington. This is Bragg now, a message to Wilmington saying Fort Fisher is under control, which is the 19th century version of Kevin Bacon saying all is well in the movie Animal House, right?
Yeah, that's exactly. What this is. Yeah, we're all good. It's all good.
Now Bragg's thinking, okay, everything's falling apart. It's a big mess. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to change commanders. I'm going to send General Alfred Colquitt now to go take over the fort. Like, that's going to make a friggin' difference. So he's going to send Colquitt, not troops to help the fort, but him and a 3-man staff on a rowboat, and they're going to row merrily down from Sugarloaf to head to Fort Fisher.
God.
He thinks just by changing the Band-Aid is going to make make it go away, right?
Well, it's like moving the deck chairs around on the fucking Titanic while it's sinking. What's it going to do?
Exactly. So while this is going on, Terry is actually going to get to the fort himself. This is around 7:00 at night now, with Cyrus Comstock. And Comstock actually talks Terry out of committing the rest of Payne's division because he's thinking, you know what? We need to keep that northern line strong just in case, because in case they do send reinforcements. So he kind of doesn't really send anybody else. But with everything pretty much lost now, James Riley, who's now in charge of the fort, will evacuate both William Whiting and Charles Lamb out of that hospital to the southern point of the peninsula where Battery Buchanan is, where they were firing the guns on the fort. Now, as the Union continues to drive, the rest of the Confederates are rushing to Battery Buchanan, like recess just got called. They're heading that quickly because they know the fort can't be defended anymore. They know that the jig is up, the horse is out of the barn. So Colquitt and his aides are going to arrive around 10 o'clock p.m. now. This is the guy that Bragg sent to take over for Whiting and for Lamb.
Yeah.
Now, at this point, the Confederates are all stuck on that southern peninsula, and Ames has now set up a strong defense inside the fort. So they own the fort now.
They do.
And meanwhile, north of the fort, Payne's division has set up that strong defensive line. And oh, by the way, there are 58 gunships still off the coast looking at you. You know that meme that this is fine, that dog?
Yeah, the dog is the burning. Yeah, that's perfect for that.
This is when it was invented right
here.
Yeah,
exactly.
Moment, right?
Yep.
So at this point, Major Riley said he pulls out his F this card and says, I don't get paid. I'm too old for this shit. And he's going to raise the white flag. He's going to surrender the fort. Now, Alfred Terry is going to arrive at Battery Buchanan and is going to receive that formal surrender from Whiting. And the funny part about it is just at this moment, Colquitt basically arrives. And you know what he does? Turns around, goes, nope. So
God.
Nope. He says, turn
like,
around.
Nope. We're not doing that shit.
Base says, roll them up, kids. That's pretty much how it goes.
And then, so after Fort Fisher fell, like Bragg would write Jeff Davis that he was quote unquote mortified that it fell.
Well,
that's the biggest bullshit statement of the Civil War.
He sends the message, I am mortified at having to report the unexpected capture of Fort Fisher with most of the garrison at about 10 o'clock tonight, particulars are not known. Here's what's cool about that line. That message, who we first sent it to was Robert E. Lee. That's who the first person he sent it to.
Shit.
Then he sent it to Davis and then to Zebulon Vance, the governor of North Carolina. But Lee got the first message. He found it first. Now, just imagine the situation now. The Union is in control of this fort.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it's party time. Okay, on the boats in the fort, I imagine the officers handing out Fort Fisher champion T-shirts and hats as the confetti's falling.
They're handing out DQ certificates for the DQs in Wilmington, maybe.
But with this fort fallen now, the death warrant is signed for Wilmington. There's no question, right? So, when he does finally message Davis gets the message and he face palms. He writes back. The intelligence is sad and it is unexpected. Can you retake the fort? If anything is to be done by you, you will appreciate the necessity of being attempted without a moment's delay. Okay, sure. Sounds good. But again, Bragg doesn't do anything. He sits back because, again, goes back to the original point I said a little while ago. He thinks if he sends troops, that he's going to lose Wilmington. But he doesn't realize he's lost Wilmington by losing Fort Fisher, right?
He's not recognizing the strategy behind this.
But that is the mortally insane mindset of Braxton Bragg here, because he doesn't realize you can't keep Wilmington and not have Fort Fisher. Mm-hmm. He should have defended Fort Fisher, but for whatever reason, he thought he could fall back to the town and defend that with Fort Fisher gone. And it's got to be one of the more mind-numbing, idiotic moments of military thinking in this entire war. Now, not to spoil the surprise, Mary, but February 19th, you know what happens?
I'm going to guess we're going to talk about it in our next episode, but Wilmington is not going to make it.
Wilmington is going to fall about a month later. So regardless of what this was, it was the end of the line. Now, back at the fort on January 16th, going back to the fort real quick, there was all that partying going on, and there was an incident that did happen, right? Now, basically, the soldiers were getting drunk, and they were partying, having a great time. They were shooting off fireworks. They were firing guns up in the air. After the battle, and all the nights of celebrating, there were several soldiers who were sleeping on the roof of the magazine. Mm-hmm. That's where they were sleeping. This is troops, Union troops as well as rebel POWs. Apparently, a couple of drunk Marines went into the magazine, looking for something to plunder. Who the hell knows what they were doing? But they took lit matches and torches in there, and the whole thing blew up, and it killed 200 guys who were sleeping on the roof.
Oh my God.
Including their own men and their own guys. Now, there was an official court inquiry held by a guy named General Joseph Abbott, who mentioned him earlier, of the 2nd Brigade, as well as a guy named George Towle, who was a captain at the 4th New Hampshire. And he's part of Louis Bell's brigade, right? The drunken Marines' identities were never discovered, or at least mentioned in the official report. So they probably know who did it, but just didn't say anything. But it was kind of a sad ending to this, that you lost a lot of lives just because of things being completely out of control. The battle, soon after the battle is going to be over, Terry and Porter receive a special guest unannounced, which they must have really loved, when Secretary of War Edwin Stanton knocked on the door.
That would not be my guest of honor.
This was a pop-in. They weren't expecting him, okay? Now, Stanton was thrilled with the results, and he later told Lincoln, "You'll be pleased to know that perfect harmony and concert of action existed between our land and naval forces. Admiral Porter and General Terry vied in the commendation each of each other." So this is a direct shot at Butler.
Okay? Yeah, absolutely.
Because what he's telling Lincoln is, these guys are singing Kumbaya, doing each other's nails, having a great time. They get along perfectly.
I'm just picturing that.
But look how well things work, because they got together and they got along. And this was a direct shot at Butler. There's no question.
Wow.
But Terry is going to present Stanton with the Fort Fisher garrison flag. And of course, Stanton is going to write a letter praising both Terry and Porter for their joint operations. And Stanton's going to write about them: "The combined operations of the squadron of land forces of your commands deserve and will receive the thanks of a nation." Rumor has it Stanton might have even smiled. We don't know, but he might have actually smiled. So he was happy. So, we'll discuss the fall of Wilmington, the Battle of Wilmington, in the next episode. But for the most part, once the fort was gone, as was the town. Now, we mentioned before how important the town was as an active supply hub for Lee's army. It is no surprise that about 2 months later, after Fort Fisher falls, Lee's going to surrender.
Absolutely.
And when you think of Lee's advance of the Appomattox campaign, what was he doing? He was looking for supplies and food. And the reason why he was because that supply line in Wilmington was cut off from Fort Fisher.
It was, yeah. And, a couple of other things to note about this second battle is there's 54 medals of honor awarded to soldiers who fought here, including one member of the United States Colored Troops. Mm-hmm. It's one of the biggest, amphibious landings in the Civil War.
It was the biggest amphibious landing that will up until D-Day.
Up until D-Day,
1944.
Yeah, it's the heaviest naval fire, and up until D-Day. And the loss of Fort Fisher is going to compromise the safety and usefulness, as we're going to talk about in our next episode of Wilmington. Mm-hmm. It's one of these domino effects, right? And I don't think a lot of people realize how much Fort Fisher and Wilmington, how much it hinges on what is going to happen at Appomattox in April of 1865.
And you mentioned the Medal of Honor is the 54. Curtis and Pennypacker are going to be two of the 54.
And Pennypacker. I was just going to say Pennypacker is. Go ahead, talk about him.
Oh no, I was going to say, he's a guy who he's doing this at age 20.
Exactly,
right?
It's crazy.
And he's going to get his star. He's going to he's be breveted, but he's going to get he's going to become a general at age 20, the youngest general the youngest American-born general, because Lafayette got one at age 19. But he got one at age 20, the youngest one, and that's still effect today. He's still the youngest one in American history. Yeah. So,
and they thought he was going to die of his wounds, and he lives until 1916. He lives
for a while. So as far as living and not living, the casualties, that joint federal and Navy losses were just about 1,000, right?
Yeah.
You have 650 for the infantry and about 400 or so for the Navy, mostly from Breeze's Marines when they were charging that seawall. The Rebs lost 600 dead and wounded, but lost that entire garrison, around 1,300 guys, including Lamb and Whiting. Now, what's interesting is Lamb, he survives. He's going to spend the next 7 years of his life on crutches from this battle.
Yeah.
Okay. And he's going to survive. He'll later become the mayor of Norfolk, Virginia. And he's going to switch from being a Democrat to a Republican. And he'll end up being close friends with General Newton Martin Curtis.
Yep.
Maybe he measured how tall he was. We don't know. But they were close friends. Though Curtis also lost an eye in this battle. So there's kind of
there's that.
But they were actually instrumental in helping calm tensions between the North and the South after the war. They got together and fought the combatants at Fort Fisher. We fought here. We're both injured, but everything could be cool. Curtis, he's going to end up being a big part of that. Now, Whiting for that, with W.C. Whiting, William H.C. Whiting, rather, he ain't going to be as fortunate, Mary, because he's in for a shitty day, right?
Yeah.
He's going to be taken to prison to Governor's Island in New York Harbor, and he is going to die of dysentery, which is a lot of fun. But less than 2 months after surrendering the fort, he's going to die. He was pissed at Bragg until his dying day
for
not
I can't
supporting
imagine
him.
why.
He was literally in his jail cell writing letters to Richmond demanding an investigation while he was dying of dysentery. So,
I would love to know if there, was there an investigation into that as to why Bragg just ignored him for 3 days?
I think the only thing I can think of is that he did not want to commit troops to Fort Fisher because he thought it was going to weaken Wilmington. He was going to need the troops and that's the thing that therein lies the big mistake there, is it doesn't make any sense, because he should have known that Wilmington could not exist without Fort Fisher. And for whatever reason, he just thought that wasn't the case. So it can truly be said that the fall of Fort Fisher was the final nail in the coffin of the Confederacy. There's no doubt.
I agree.
The surrender of the fort was it changed the question of the Confederacy surrendering to not if but when.
Yeah, exactly.
And they knew that was the end of the day, and no surprise, it was going to come about 2 months later in Appomattox with the Army of Northern Virginia, and eventually with Bentonville with Joseph Johnson down the road. Yep. But you cannot overstate enough how important Fort Fisher was. And how important it was that this joint Navy-Army venture took care of it, because it had to be done, and they finally did it. It took 2 tries, but they finally did it.
Agreed, they did. And so I think that wraps up part 2 of our discussion about Fort Fisher. Next week, we are going to be talking about Wilmington, which is our final part in this discussion, the fall of Wilmington, which is... It plays into this. It plays into the fall of Appomattox and the demise of, kind of the Army of Northern Virginia, and all that plays into the end of the Civil War, right?
Well, this will be a fun one, too, because we're going to talk about John Schofield again.
Exactly. Schofield's there.
From Franklin. Yeah. Now, it's going to be interesting when we talk about it, because you're going to have that Sugarloaf line. They're going to fall back. They're going to fight and fall back. And eventually, not to spoil it, but you're going to have Bragg, who's going to take a lot of the supplies and get them out of there. He's going to burn a lot of the tobacco factories and some of the warehouses. And eventually Schofield will take over Wilmington. He will use that as his launching point for Sherman's Carolina campaign that's going to end up going up towards Bentonville, we talked about last time. So this is going to be getting that foothold in Wilmington for John Schofield. But it's an interesting thing to talk about. I think Fort Fisher is going to be a situation that is studied a lot, but I think it needs to be studied more.
Exactly,
because I think not a lot is talked about North Carolina, Mary, admittedly. It's really, really not. And I think you cannot have a true story of the end of this war without Fort Fisher. And it's why I think that's probably why it ended up in that Lincoln movie.
Oh, I agree. It isn't, really and that's the one thing that, that's kind of, when we watched that last week, it's kind of like, wow, they're talking about Fort Fisher. It's clearly an important thing in the end of the Civil War. It needs to be addressed a lot more. And when you look at it, you reckon, you kind of fit together these pieces of the Civil War puzzle that, Fort Fisher falls, Wilmington falls, and all of a sudden Richmond falls. And that's exactly what Robert E. Lee said would happen, right? So you have to look at these. You can't look at the Civil War in these silos of just Richmond or Fort Fisher or whatever. Everything has an effect on what else is happening, right?
It all goes in, but everything it was falling apart anyway. The election was over. Lincoln was the president again. But what this did right now is it just, it was a final piece of Anaconda Plan. It really was the final, like I said before, it was the final nail in the coffin. So exactly. I'm glad. I think we did this just as fun talking about it. So we'll talk next week about the fall of Wilmington. So what is coming up next? I know it's Wilmington. What else is on our agenda?
Wilmington is coming up next, but next Wednesday night, on the 26th, Wednesday the 26th at 6 p.m. we have our first book club meeting of 2022, which is about Armistead and Hancock at Gettysburg by Tom Macmillan. The author will be joining us for that. Even if you haven't read the book, you can join us for that discussion, 6 p.m. via Zoom, info@civilwarbreakfastclub.com. This episode will be dropping, actually, you're listening to it right now. We'll be doing our Facebook Live on Sunday. So our next episode is going to be on Fort Wilmington. And then after that, Mill Springs. So we were pushing everything back by a week.
So a lot of stuff coming down the pike. So any final words from you, Fincheroo?
So thank you to all of our listeners for these 72 episodes. You guys are awesome. Thank you tonight for the roundtable as well for those of you that joined us. And thank you to you, Darren, for being the awesome co-host and putting up with me as well.
Well,
for being kind of because sometimes I jump ahead and apparently I turned the way back machine into the let's go forward machine. So thank you for
like Dr. Brown, sometimes. But
I am. But yeah, any final words from you?
Nope. I think it was a fun episode. It's fun to do this. It's always fun to do this with you, and look forward to the next action-packed episode of Civil War Breakfast Club. Funko Mary says hello.
Funko Mary.
And we'll head off to our next thing. So
actually, Owl Mead.
Oh God.
Says hello.
Yes, it's just like that. Okay. Anyway, so everybody, thanks for joining on. We appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Have a great and safe weekend. Stay warm, stay dry, and have a great rest of the work week as well. So thanks everybody for appreciating it. We will talk soon. As always, we will see you on the other side. Peace out, everybody.
See you guys later.